units that we regard as our constituent units in Nigeria today have no organic existence, have no organic identities. They were imposed, and that's what we are dealing with. So when people call themselves Northerners in Nigeria, they are really not saying anything. They are living up to a category that was defined for them by outsiders. When people call themselves Easterners and Westerners and Southerners, we are products of artificial creations. Okay? Now, but also think of it. The ethnic groups that we have in our country today, the names that they bear, the territories that they claim for themselves, all of these things only took roots and got consolidated within these artificial entities that we had as the constituent units of Nigeria. So I dare argue and tell you that even some of those ethnic groups, so-called, are artificial. Okay, now, you are not clapping properly because you are still trying to say, is he saying? Is he saying, you know, that we are not who we claim to be? You know? Now, in disaggregative federal systems, the stakes are a little higher. In practice, these are more difficult federal systems to govern. The reason is that somebody was citing the Bible a while ago. Does the clay say to its maker, why have you made me so? All the states, all the local governments, all the regions, all of these structures were created by the central government. And you then turn up to the central government to say, we want your power. Now, you think of it. That's a difficult bargain. That's a difficult bargain. You that I created. Remember in 1991 and 1996, many of the states that were created were given 30 million naira to take off by the federal government. So we created you and made you what you are. And then you turn around to look us in the face and say, we want your power. That would be too daring. But that's the difficulty with disaggregative federal systems. Because the central government retains a conception of proprietary rights. These are my creations, and I'll continue to deal with them. So when you have people who, in Nigeria, don't want true federalism, that's the sense. Because when you govern the center and you have created these structures, you think that they are too stubborn. And you cut them to size. Now, because federalism is very difficult and there are no guarantees, in different parts of the world, federal systems have invented instrumentalities that will make for some harmony and for survival. So, in the old Soviet Union, they entered in their constitution a clause allowing for secession, saying any of the 16 Soviet republics could secede if it no longer considered it necessary to belong to the Union. And they said to Lenin, you want a federal constitution. This is unfederal. Secession is incompatible with federalism. So he says, well, you probably have a point. Why don't you also say that divorce is incompatible with marriage? The fact that there is the possibility that you can invoke the divorce clause if the marriage is no longer working does not lead every wife to say to the husband, I divorce you. Or every husband to say to the wife, I divorce you. But you know that whatever happens in the marriage, you continue to persevere. knowing that as a last resort, if everything does not work, there's always an exit point. That's how Lenin got those people. And today in Ethiopia, there's a secession clause. Because the Oromo, the Tigrayans, all of those people feared Amharic domination. And they went back to the Soviet Union, and then they said, look, we can do things with secession. If you ask Ethiopians, but you know, this is just honorific. They say no. Eritrea was the first, member of Ethiopia to activate that clause. Good. So Yugoslavia under Marshal Tito felt we cannot have a good federation if we didn't strengthen our local governments. And so they introduced something that was new to federal theory. They gave us a three-tier federal system. Nigeria followed suit. Yes, we did. And the world was then saying, there's something to learn from a three-tier federal system. So we have a lot to teach the world. Then in India, in Canada, in Nigeria, the central government can activate its emergency powers and take over the governance of a constituent unit. We have seen that. They say, no, that's not federal. But if that's what works for you, it's federal for you. Let's focus on Nigeria. So we became independent in 1960. And so we had 3 regions. And then we ended up with 4 regions. And then we had 12 states. And then we had 19. We had 21. We had 36. Today we have 774 local governments. Now, these things didn't come from nowhere. These were things that we sat together, thought through, and decided that that's the way to go. And I have proof for that. We had 3 regions that we inherited at independence. Each of those regions was autonomous. Autonomous to the point where each one even had a different consulate in London. Can you imagine it? The Western region had its consulate in London. The Eastern region had its consulate in London. The Northern region had its consulate in London, in addition to the Nigerian consulate. So, an observer of the Nigerian federal system at the time said, these are not federating units. These are independent countries in a primitive international system. That's how divided we were. And you know, you couldn't do things in one region if you didn't come from there. It was north for northerners, west for westerners, and east for easterners. Onyama, at the 1950 Ibadan General Conference, said the following: if you have all decided that the north is for northerners, the west is for westerners, and the east is for easterners, what would belong to Nigeria? I want you to also put that at the back of your mind, because if by restructuring you say, let's go back to east for easterners, west for westerners, and north for northerners, what and where would Nigeria be? Okay? Now, when the military struck in 1966, the guys came to the conclusion, and we all agreed, that the greatest problem this country faced was the problem of extreme regionalism. And therefore, we needed to, strengthen that center. Who were the chief advocates of a strong center? Ethnic minorities. Because they were oppressed in the regions, and they knew that they needed a counterweight to those dominant majorities in the regions. At the time, the minorities even said, We have a problem with a police force that is local.